Thank you so much for this chance. We really appreciate your time. مساء الخير. احنا سعداء باللقاء اليوم باقتصادي متميز، وهو أندريا أراوز الذي عمل كمدير للقطاع البنكي بالبنك المركزي في الإكوادور خلال الفترة من 2011 إلى 2013، كما كان مرشحا لمنصب الرئاسة في البلاد في عام 2021. تعيش دول الجنوب العالمي مؤخرا تحت وطأة أزمة اقتصادية بالغة، مع خروج مليارات من الدولارات من خارج الدول النامية للبحث عن فرص أكبر في الربح في الاستثمار في السوق الأمريكي، مع اتجاه الولايات المتحدة لاستهداف التضخم عن طريق معدلات مرتفعة من الفائدة. حدث ذلك بغض النظر عن الظروف الداخلية في كل بلد والتي ساهمت في مفاقمة الأزمة. ولكن نستطيع أن نلاحظ أوجه للشبه بين مصر والدول النامية، والتي تتمثل في معاناة كل منها من ضعف العملة المحلية مقابل الدولار، واضطرارها لتحمل فائدة مرتفعة على ديونها السيادية باعتبارها الطريقة التي تستطيع من خلالها جذب المستثمرين في مقابل المنافسة الأمريكية. As many indicators show that there are many similarities between developing countries and how far the current crises are related to the US dollar system itself, not just the internal issues in each country. So I will ask you just 4 questions regarding this perspective.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate with your audience in Egypt and the Middle East. I think the situation right now in the global south is of extreme stress. The sudden rise in interest rates in all of 2022 takes a small lag of 3 to 6 to maybe 8 months to kick in fully. It will have consequences both in the central countries and the rich countries that are the protagonists of these interest rises. But of course, it will have a great impact on the periphery and specifically on the global south. It is obvious that this will become a major global south debt crisis. It is already evident and seen all over the world, not just in Africa, not just in Latin America, not only in South Asia. I think there is a huge risk to the people of the global south, because an ever-growing portion of the national budgets is being used to pay off external debt. With rising interest rates, that will mean more debt service, and more debt service means bigger balance of payments deficits, and it means new debt again. Now, this is a vicious cycle, which can only be sort of dismantled with collective action from the global south. And I think collective action is absolutely crucial in this context. And we hope that there's enough minimum levels of coordination of countries of the global south to challenge this hegemonic financial system that is creating vulnerabilities among the people of the south.
You adopt the dependency theory in your analysis. You still believing in this theory?
Yeah, I think the dependency theory is a good framework to analyze financial flows, specifically also technological hierarchies. I think the way the international system is constructed gives more weight to the central countries of the basically North Atlantic. You have outsized proportion of their power within the International Monetary Fund, which is the entity that decides, how the debt sustainability analysis of each country is considered adequate or not, decides whether to issue special drawing rights, which is basically this debt-free form of money, international assets that are distributed to countries. But that decision cannot be made without the support of the rich countries of the global north. And I think in terms of international money hierarchies, it is obvious that not all currencies are created equal. You have a hierarchy where the US dollar is at the top of the pyramid. You have certain other reserve currencies as approved by the IMF, like the euro, the yen, the yuan, the British pound. And then you have basically everybody else in the bottom layer or in the periphery. So I think that the dynamic of how money works internationally, how financial flows operate internationally, are absolutely linked to this element of core and periphery.
Okay, and you mentioned also that the developing countries should adopt a collective action in this regard. Could you clarify what you mean by collective action?
What collective action means is a series of measures that have to be unilateral in nature, but coordinated among the countries of the South. For example, we need collective default of sovereign bonds, right? We need collective default. Hopefully on the same day, the countries of the global South that are in debt crisis or that are expected to be in debt crisis in the near future have to announce that we are not going to pay these debts anymore, and that we will not be serving these debts until we have an international debt conference that rearranges the power dynamics within the international financial system. Okay.
يعني regarding the first part about the financial market and the needed collective action, يعني do you think that we can challenge the authority of the IMF staff report? You know that every time the staff reports say that this country is not following the needed reforms, this means that this country will be blocked. They cannot access any capital markets anywhere after this kind of reports. So every developing country feels that they cannot challenge this authority.
Right. This is why if each country individually tries to fight the IMF, the bond markets, and the capital markets, it will be a fruitless action, right? It will not be possible for every small country to have that fight individually. That's why we need to do it collectively, because we all know that those technical reports are not really technical in nature. They have an ideology incorporated into them. They have a value system incorporated into them that does not take into account the human rights framework, that does not take into account the development framework. The right to development is not incorporated into the doctrine of the technical reports of the IMF. Therefore, we need to overcome all this by incorporating these other issues, the right to development especially, into these organizations, but that means also changing the power structure. Now, that will not be done out of generosity from the rich countries that are now have all the power within those institutions, right? That will come from collective action from the global South countries. And one way of quickly doing that, by generating shivers in the international system that will motivate the dialogue and discussion at a more balanced level, means stop servicing the debt by announcing a debt default, a debt freeze, a debt service freeze simultaneously between, I don't know, at least 30 countries, and that will show the strength and the unity of the global South.
How far the dollar system creating this kind of systematic crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Federal Reserve is, to a great extent, I would say most of the responsibility of the current situation is in the hands of the Federal Reserve. That has pushed interest rates up, not only in their own economy, but because when they do that, the capital, foreign speculative capital, threatens other countries that if they don't do the same, they will just leave the country. So it forces the emerging markets to also raise the interest rates. So yeah, the way the hierarchy of the money system is arranged, with the dollar on top, with the Federal Reserve administering that hierarchy, is absolutely responsible for the situation in terms of debt service. Now, with the perspective of the global South, the pandemic showed us that the international monetary hierarchy is not only with respect to the preponderance of certain currencies over others. It is that the lender of last resort and the safety net that is designed to cover financial instability and issues of debt and so on is not democratic or egalitarian in nature whatsoever. You have the Federal Reserve that can provide infinite access of dollars to the US government, but not only that, the Federal Reserve has provided infinite access to US dollars to 5 other central banks in the world. none of which are in the global south.
Until we can reach this kind of collective action between the developing countries, يعني what are يعني the most needed actions individually from each developing country to just يعني soften the current crisis, to curb the deterioration in its local currency?
Well, the first step individually is to pick up the phone and try to call your peers, right? So the first individual action is to try to talk to countries that are facing a similar situation. I'm sorry that I'm going back to the issue of collective action, but it really does mean, exchanging ideas. This conversation we're having in Latin America and the Middle East, there has to be an attempt at coordinating between the global south countries. So it does not hurt to pick up the phone, to call the ambassador, and to try to make some links. Now, after you make some links and until you get the coordination flowing, because that has to be a lesson learned in this situation, we're not masters of our own destiny, unfortunately. We have to act together because we're working, we're living in a situation where we are all in the periphery. But after I said that, what you need to do is to guarantee what are called margins of policy space at the margin, and that implies having capital controls. It implies regulating the flow of capital so that it does not behave wildly and your entire economy is vulnerable to what some speculators may or may not do. So you have to establish minimum limits of behavior of capital, responsible investment criteria of financial flows. That's a very basic issue that has to be taken care of. A second issue that has to be done is efforts at trying to build enough of a domestic economic base, a material base, where you can try to fulfill the basic rights of the population without being absolutely vulnerable to the comings and goings of international commodity markets. And that means having a proactive use of a subsidy policy, an incentive policy, a tax policy, and industrial policy for that purpose. It also means having all the adequate levers on the functioning of your domestic financial system, a central bank that works for the people, local businesses, and not for the interests of foreign speculators. And it means, of course, having a sovereign possibility to finance these contingent emergency financial needs of the domestic budget without having to go beg for money to the IMF or to foreign speculators. So it means strengthening the financial apparatus of an economy on a sovereign basis while having regulation of capital flows that could weaken your domestic economy.
My last point about if there is any positive or maybe a revolutionary example from Latin America we can discuss in this regard, يعني on the regard of coordinating with its neighbors to challenge the IMF authority or even to adopt a different kind of policies inside.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in South America, we have many examples of that throughout the 21st century that have even been covered by hegemonic media. One example was when Brazil and Argentina decided together on the same day to pay back all of their debt to the IMF and to suspend the monitoring of the IMF of their domestic economies. Brazil did have enough reserves to do that, but Argentina didn't. How could this happen? Well, Argentina got a loan from Venezuela at the time to be able to finance the prepayment of the IMF loans. And of course, the conditions, the conditionality that the IMF had over Argentina was, of course, removed because there was no such conditionality from a loan from Venezuela. So that's one example. Another example has been Ecuador, that unilaterally decided to default on its debt by declaring it illegitimate, and it repurchased most of its bond market debt at a very, very steep discount. And this is also something that could be done by countries of the Global South with financing of other Global South countries that may have some surplus reserves, right? So most bonds right now of the Global South countries are under 40 cents per dollar. right? If you buy them in the secondary market, which means that you could, in theory, finance a huge debt wipeout if only we could find a partner with some reserves that could, strike out all of, not all, but a significant portion of this foreign debt in very, very short term.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrea.
Thank you very much. It's time for the Global South to coordinate, and please do not forget that there are very simple steps that we can take forward, like such as regulating capital flows, repurchasing back debt. So yeah, thank you again for the invitation,
you so much.
and have a good one.